Spartacus, the slave who defied Rome. Part 1, The Chains of Rome. What if I told you that once upon a time, a slave nearly broke the spine of Rome itself? What if I told you that a man dragged in chains from a wild foreign land, beaten, sold, and condemned to fight to the death for sport, rose to command an army so vast, so terrifying, that senators in togas trembled in their marble halls? Would you believe that the empire of emperors, conqueror of Carthage and Greece, was almost undone by a gladiator whose name still burns across history? Spartacus? Before we begin, let me pause for a heartbeat. If you are fascinated by history's hidden truths, where myth collides with fact and where forgotten voices roar back into life, consider subscribing to Obscure Truths. Here we peel back the layers of time to reveal the extraordinary stories that shaped our world. And trust me, you won't want to miss what lies ahead. Roman crisis. The world of Spartacus was not the Rome of emperors and golden statues. He lived in the last century before Christ, around 105 to 71 BC, an age of turmoil. Rome had risen like a storm. In 146 BC, Carthage was destroyed, its fields sown with salt. Greece fell to Roman legions in the same year. Rome stood unchallenged in the Mediterranean. But victory carried poison. Wealth flooded into the city, but inequality tore society apart. The rich grew richer, the poor sank deeper into misery. Between 135 to 132 BC, Sicily erupted in the First Servile War, when slaves seized the island for years. Again, in 104 to 100 BC, a second Servile War broke out, another slave rebellion, crushed but not forgotten. In 91 to 87 BC, the Social War pitted Rome against its Italian allies demanding citizenship. The Republic bled, even as it conquered. By 82 BC, the dictator Sulla ruled with iron, filling the streets with corpses in his bloody prescriptions. Rome was triumphant abroad, but rotting within. And at the heart of this empire of conquest were the slaves, perhaps 1 in every 5 people in Italy. They tilled the fields, mined the mountains, built the aqueducts, and died in the arenas. Rome's greatness was written in their blood. It was into this world that Spartacus was born, sometime between 105 and 100 BC, in Thrace, a rugged land of forests and mountains beyond Greece. To the Romans, Thracians were barbarians, half wild, good only as mercenaries or slaves. But from this soil, hardened by wolves, war, and hunger, a legend would rise. We know little of his childhood. Thrace, straddling modern Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey, was a frontier land, forever caught between empires. Some say Spartacus was a shepherd, fending off wolves with his staff. Others whisper that he served as a soldier, perhaps even as a Roman auxiliary, learning the ways of legionary war before turning against it. But all ancient sources agree, Spartacus was Thracian. Plutarch tells us he was no ordinary man, intelligent, cultured, more Greek than Thracian. He possessed both strength and mind, a rare combination among men who were meant to be broken. And yet, whatever his beginnings, fate delivered him into chains. Captured, enslaved, dragged from Thrace to Italy, he was sold not as a man but as property. Imagine the iron biting his wrists, the auctioneer's voice echoing as strangers bartered over his life. Rome saw him as nothing but fuel for its endless appetite, a slave destined for blood. Among all fates, none was more spectacular and more lethal than that of a gladiator. Rome loved bloodsport. Crowds roared as men fought beasts and each other, as swords clashed under the blazing sun. The arena was theater, politics, and death entwined. Spartacus was sent to Capua, to the school of Lentulus Batiatus, a Lanista whose business was training men to die for the crowd's pleasure. Picture the ludus, high walls, barred gates, dormitories packed with bodies, the air heavy with sweat and despair. Hundreds of slaves drilled with wooden swords, learning to fight, to kill, to die. Some embraced the life, dreaming of glory and freedom. Most would never see another year. But Spartacus was different. He watched, he listened, he waited. He was not broken. Plutarch writes of a vision. Once, while Spartacus slept, a serpent coiled around his head. His Thracian wife, a prophetess of Dionysus, declared it a sign. He would wield great power, but it would end in tragedy. In Capua, surrounded by men beaten and broken, Spartacus found not despair, but brothers. Among those who sweated beside him, who bled in training, who tasted the dust of the arena, a spark ignited, and soon that spark would become fire. 200 gladiators plotted to escape. Word spread like smoke, desperate men clinging to hope. But betrayal came. Their plan was discovered. The gates would remain shut, the chains would not be broken, or so Rome believed. In 73 BC, 78 men acted, armed not with swords, but with kitchen knives, spits, and cleavers stolen from the cookhouse. They burst from the ludus. Against all odds, they cut their way free. Along the road, they seized wagons carrying gladiatorial weapons. For the first time, real steel gleamed in their hands. They fled into the countryside, hunted, desperate but alive. At their head was Spartacus. Alongside him, Crassus, Winamaus, and others who would become the leaders of a rebellion. They made for Mount Vesuvius, the great volcano looming over the Bay of Naples. There, high upon its slopes, they dug in, building a camp where no legion dared to follow. But Rome would come, and Spartacus was ready. Rome underestimated them. Senatorial magistrates believed a handful of slaves could be crushed like insects. They sent Gaius Claudius Glaber with 3,000 militia, farmers, and townsmen, not trained legionaries. Glaber believed he had the fugitives trapped. He blocked the only road down the mountain, waiting for hunger to do his work. But Spartacus thought differently. His men cut vines, wove them into ropes and ladders, and in the dead of night, they descended the sheer cliffs. Silently, they flanked the Roman camp. At dawn, they struck. Glaber's militia broke, slaughtered, and scattered. Rome had been humiliated. A band of slaves had defeated a Roman army on Italian soil. Word spread like wildfire. Villas were burned. More slaves fled their masters to join the Thracian. His numbers swelled, first hundreds, then thousands. And for the first time, Rome began to tremble. By the end of 73 BC, Spartacus commanded not a band of fugitives, but an army. An army forged in chains, hardened by desperation, bound by the dream of freedom. No longer a gladiator, no longer a slave, he was something far more dangerous. A leader. Rome had crushed Carthage, broken Greece, and subdued kingdoms across the Mediterranean. But in the fields of Italy itself, a new war was rising, one not led by kings or generals, but by slaves. And its name was Spartacus. If you want to see how a band of fugitives turned into an army that shook Rome, make sure to subscribe. The true rebellion begins in Part 2. Part 2, the rebellion ignites. By the winter of 73 BC, what began with 78 gladiators had become something Rome could no longer ignore. Spartacus was no longer just a fugitive, he was a leader. Behind him, thousands of men, women, and children. Slaves who had fled their masters, peasants who had nothing left to lose, wanderers who dreamed of freedom. What started as an escape had become a movement, a fire. And fires, when fed by injustice, burn hotter than any legion can contain. So the question hung heavy over Rome. Could the Republic, conqueror of kings, crush a rebellion led by slaves? The growing army. At first, they were hundreds, then thousands. By early 72 BC, Spartacus commanded as many as 40,000 men. Farmers joined with sickles, shepherds with staffs, fugitives with whatever they could carry. He armed them with stolen Roman weapons, forged new blades with the help of blacksmiths. This was not yet a professional army. It was chaos, men hungry, desperate, driven by rage and hope. But Spartacus gave them discipline. He taught them not only to fight, but to trust each other, to move as one. And most of all, he gave them purpose. We fight not for plunder, but for freedom. The first victories, Rome sent praetors to crush him. First Gaius Claudius Glaber, then Publius Varinius. Both failed. Time and again, Spartacus outwitted them. On Mount Vesuvius, he descended vines to ambush. Against Varinius, he captured his camp, his standards, even his horses. Defeated praetors fled in shame. Plutarch and Appian described a series of humiliations. Roman forces scattered, their commanders disgraced. One Roman commander even escaped on foot, abandoning his soldiers. The Republic had rarely known such shame. By summer, Spartacus's army swelled to 70,000 strong. No longer just fugitives, they were a force to be reckoned with. The Senate could not ignore the humiliation. Rome had crushed Carthage, humbled kings, ruled the Mediterranean. Yet here in Italy itself, slaves mocked the legions. Panic spread. Villas burned across Campania. Rich senators abandoned their estates. Traders feared the roads. For the first time, whispers reached the city. Could Spartacus march on Rome? The Senate dispatched the consuls of 72 BC, Lucius Gellius Publicola and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Clodianus, with 2 full consular armies. Rome meant to end this rebellion once and for all. But Rome still underestimated the Thracian. Within Spartacus's army, cracks began to form. Not all shared the same vision. Crassus, the Gaul, urged direct attack on Rome, pillaging as they went. Spartacus dreamed instead of escape, marching north, crossing the Alps, leading his people home to Thrace, Gaul, and freedom. The disagreement tore the army in two. Crassus took 30,000 men and marched separately. Spartacus led the rest northward. Rome seized the chance. The consul Gellius attacked Crassus near Mount Garganus. Outnumbered, the Gaulish leader fell. Tens of thousands were slaughtered. Crassus was dead. When Spartacus heard of Crassus's death, grief turned to fury. He gathered prisoners from his victories. 300 Roman captives were forced to fight to the death. Gladiatorial games in honor of Crassus. Blood paid for blood. It was both vengeance and message. Rome, you are not invincible. You too can be made to bleed for our dead. This act seared into Roman memory. To the Senate, Spartacus was no longer a nuisance. He was an existential threat. In the spring of 72 BC, Spartacus's army, now perhaps 120,000 strong, surged north. His vision was clear. Break free of Italy, cross the Alps, scatter back to their homelands. Freedom lay beyond the mountains. But history is cruel. Sources disagree on why Spartacus turned back. Some say his followers refused to leave the plunder of Italy. Others claim he was forced by circumstance, by hunger, by Roman pursuit. Whatever the reason, instead of marching out of history, Spartacus turned south again, and in doing so, he marched into destiny. By the end of 72 BC, Rome was shaken to its core. Armies of consuls had failed, senators whispered in fear, and Spartacus still lived. But Rome would not surrender. The Senate would call upon a new commander, rich, ruthless, ambitious. His name was Marcus Licinius Crassus, and with him, the rebellion would face its greatest trial. The storm is coming. Don't miss how Spartacus will face Rome's richest and most ruthless commander. Subscribe and be ready for Part 3. Part 3, Blood and Betrayal. By the dawn of 71 BC, the rebellion of Spartacus had raged for nearly 3 years. Rome had been humiliated, armies shattered, consuls disgraced, villas burned, an entire republic mocked by slaves. But Rome had not fallen. The Senate, desperate and furious, turned to one man, Marcus Licinius Crassus. Richest of Romans, cold, ruthless, ambitious beyond measure. If Spartacus was the flame, Crassus would be the hammer, and Rome would have its revenge. Crassus was not like the consuls who had failed before. He knew the rebellion could only be crushed with iron discipline. He gathered 8 legions, perhaps 40,000 to 50,000 men. He drilled them, punished them, forged them into steel. When soldiers fled from battle, he revived an ancient punishment long abandoned: decimation. Every 10th man of a disgraced unit was executed by his comrades. The message was clear: fear Crassus more than Spartacus. Under such terror, his army hardened. Rome had finally found a commander who would not underestimate the Thracian. Meanwhile, Spartacus sought escape. His victories had made him famous, but also trapped him in Italy. He tried to bargain with Cilician pirates to ferry his army across to Sicily, where he hoped to spark another revolt. But the pirates betrayed him. They took his gold and vanished. Stranded, Spartacus turned south again. His dream of freedom faded, but his will did not. Crassus moved with brutal efficiency. He cornered Spartacus in the toe of Italy, in the region of Bruttium. There, he ordered his legions to dig. They built a line of ditches, walls, and palisades, 60 kilometers long, cutting off Spartacus from supplies and escape. The slaves were trapped between the Roman fortifications and the sea. For months, hunger gnawed. Desperation grew, but Spartacus would not surrender. In a storm, his men filled ditches with earth, brush, and corpses, and broke through the Roman lines. The rebellion lived, but it was bleeding. The end drew near. Rome's legions closed in from all sides. Pompey, returning from Spain, marched into Italy, ready to steal Crassus's glory. Spartacus, knowing time was short, prepared for one last battle. According to Plutarch, before the fight, he brought his horse before his men. He killed it with his own hand, declaring, "If I win, I shall have plenty of Roman horses. If I lose, I will need none." It was not the speech of a man who hoped to live. It was the vow of a man who chose to die free. The armies clashed. Spartacus's men fought with the fury of desperation, cutting down centurions, breaking through Roman lines. In the chaos, Spartacus pushed forward, seeking Crassus himself. He killed 2 centurions, fought his way through shield walls, his body pierced by spears. Even as his men fell around him, he stood his ground, kneeling on one leg, shield raised, striking until the last breath. And there, on the blood-soaked field, Spartacus fell. The rebellion collapsed. Survivors fled, only to be cut down by Pompey's legions arriving from the north. 6,000 prisoners were taken. Along the Via Appia, the great road from Capua to Rome, they were crucified one by one. 6,000 crosses lined the road, a forest of death, a warning written in blood. Rome had restored its pride, but it had also created a legend. Spartacus left no writings, no tomb, no legacy but memory. To Rome he was a criminal, a rebel crushed beneath the heel of the Republic. But to history he became something else, a symbol. For centuries, poets, revolutionaries, and dreamers would speak his name. A man who began as a slave, who rose against the greatest power of his age and chose to die free rather than live chained. The man perished. The myth endured, and his name was Spartacus. Spartacus is gone, but his legend lives forever. If you want more untold stories of history's forgotten rebels and rulers, subscribe to Obscure Truths and keep the fire alive.